My boyfriend had sexsomnia. To prove he only loved me, he would put on a chastity lock every night before bed. Later, Tiffany got pregnant, and the child was his. He knelt before me, crying, and said, "It's been years since Arthur Rivers passed. Tiffany is alone and it's not easy for her." Only then did I realize that 5 years of our relationship had been completely wasted. I immediately dialed Ethan Reed, who had been pursuing me for 10 years. An hour later, Ethan Reed, my childhood friend, and I successfully got officially married at City Hall. He left first. Brandon Rivers, who had returned, saw that I hadn't left City Hall yet and thought I was foolishly waiting for him. He angrily pulled me aside. "Audrey Reed, didn't I tell you to wait until Tiffany's baby was born before we talked about getting officially married? How can you be so insensitive? Deliberately standing at City Hall to provoke Tiffany? What if you upset her so much that something bad happens to the baby in her womb? Can you take responsibility for that?" Before I could speak, Tiffany pretended to be aggrieved, shedding tears and choking up. "I know, Ms. Audrey, you hate that Brandon Rivers and I got officially married first, but Brandon Rivers didn't intentionally get sexsomnia. How could you disobey Brandon Rivers over such a small matter? He's going to be your future husband. You'll have to rely on him to earn your living expenses." I slightly furrowed my brow and retorted, "I've already gotten officially married to someone else. Why would I continue to listen to him?" Brandon Rivers gasped, his eyebrows tightly knit. "Audrey Reed, if you're unhappy, you can say so. I will try my best to satisfy you. Instead of using such a low-class trick to get my attention." Looking at Brandon Rivers' hideous face, I turned and walked away without hesitation. Brandon Rivers, however, grabbed my wrist and said, "Tiffany and I still need a bridesmaid for our wedding tomorrow. If you're obedient, a position as the Mrs. Rivers of the Rivers family will naturally be yours." But I didn't care for the Mrs. Rivers status of the Rivers family at all. Nor did I care for a man who was already rotten. I violently shook Brandon Rivers' hand away, only to be knocked unconscious by Tiffany with a taser. When I woke up again, I was locked by Brandon Rivers in the storage room of the wedding villa we bought during our engagement. I found the spare key in the storage room, opened the door, and returned to my own room. After I finished organizing my belongings, I called the real estate agent. "I want to sell my villa in Dolphin Cove Estates at a low price. The sooner the better." As soon as the agent heard my voice, he respectfully replied, "Ms. Audrey, I will definitely help you find a suitable buyer within 3 days. You just need to wait patiently." I sent all the house information to the agent for processing and then quickly packed some personal items. When I was pulling my suitcase, ready to leave, Brandon Rivers asked me with a dark expression, "How did you open the storage room door? And I only have sexsomnia. What's the meaning of you dragging a suitcase?" I didn't answer, just gave him a cold glance. "None of your business." Tiffany saw Brandon Rivers' gaze entirely focused on me, and her eyes were full of resentment. She pulled out a Labubu doll with silver needles stuck all over it, then extracted her birth details for a ritual from inside, and cried as she asked me, "Ms. Audrey, I know you don't like the baby in my womb, and you secretly call him a bastard conceived from sexsomnia, but he is also alive. How can you use such vicious methods to curse him to death?" I snorted dismissively. It was my blind folly to ever fall for Brandon Rivers. Now that I've gotten officially married to someone else, why would I do something so thankless? Brandon Rivers scoffed, "Audrey Reed, I've already had my fill of you. What man would still want you? Only I tolerate your socialite from a prominent family temper, always accommodating you. Who else could stand your pampered and willful nature besides me?" Socialite from a prominent family temper. Brandon Rivers probably forgot that I once toned down my socialite from a prominent family temper for him before our engagement, for his business. I took drinks on his behalf multiple times, and as a result developed stomach issues. Every time I ended up in the hospital after taking drinks on his behalf for him, he would tenderly serve me porridge, making me hallucinate that he couldn't live without me. But looking at Brandon Rivers protecting Tiffany, I realized it was all just my own wishful thinking. With a face full of disdain, I retorted to Brandon Rivers, "My husband is a truly exceptional man. He married into the family and took her family's name willingly, but he's not like you, greedy and always looking for more." I lifted my foot to leave, but Brandon Rivers grabbed my wrist with a grim face, his eyes filled with contempt. "I'm not in the mood to hear you lie publicly right now. I know you almost caused Tiffany to lose her baby. You must atone for your mistakes." With that, he led me to my outdoor conservatory. He imperiously instructed me, "Tiffany is pregnant now. She can't eat the pesticide-ridden food from before. Pull up all these useless flowers for me and plant the vegetables Tiffany loves. And don't use compound fertilizer. Use farm manure instead. Feeling the scorching 40 degrees outdoor temperature, a sarcastic smile touched my lips. Brandon Rivers, we've already broken up. Why should I listen to you? Let go of me. Brandon Rivers lowered his eyes and released my hand, but allowed the bodyguards to jab a taser into my back. My body convulsed from the electric shock, and my legs involuntarily gave out. Brandon Rivers watched my suffering, his pupils constricting sharply. Audrey Reed, do you really want me to electrocute you until you can't get up before you listen to me? Looking at the taser in his hand, I subconsciously took a step back. Brandon Rivers, if you dare electrocute me again, when my husband gets here, he won't let you off the hook, and the police won't let a sadist like you get away with this. Just as Brandon Rivers, fuming, was about to throw down the taser, Tiffany suddenly rushed out. She cried in a wronged voice, Brandon Rivers, it's all my fault. Now that I'm so pregnant, I can't work in the fields like before. I'm not like my sister, who was born into a good family, eating well and dressing well, and now even has Brandon Rivers' affection. If I die, you won't have to be forced to do these tedious farm chores. After Tiffany finished speaking, she clutched her belly and stumbled towards a nearby stone pillar. Although Brandon Rivers stopped her, her forehead was still red from the impact. Brandon Rivers tenderly kissed her injury, glaring at me with resentment. Bodyguards, pull up all these flowers first. If Audrey Reed doesn't get these vegetable seedlings to grow before PM, you can punish her however you like. As long as you don't kill her, feel free to punish her. After Brandon Rivers finished speaking, he anxiously took Tiffany to the hospital. After Brandon Rivers left, as the bodyguards were about to reach for the precious flowers I had personally cultivated, I spoke up to stop them. Don't touch them. Those 10 are Juliet roses, each worth 30 million. You can't possibly afford to compensate me. But the bodyguards disdainfully picked a rose, tore off its petals and said, it's just a damn rose, what's so special about it? You think you can trick us into believing it's worth 30 million? I'm not falling for that. I clutched my fragile heart and continued to advise, trust me, I won't make you compensate for that last flower. But if you dare to touch my other flowers, I promise I'll make you lose everything. And don't think Brandon Rivers will pay for you. But the bodyguards didn't believe me at all. They ignored my words and directly pulled up all the flowers in the outdoor conservatory. Even though I endured the high temperatures and sweat, I still couldn't save my flowers. The bodyguards saw my eyes were red-rimmed and innocently pouted. This was all Mr. Rivers's order. If you want compensation, go find him, since the flowers are already pulled for you. Hurry up and plant the vegetables. We don't want to stand under this scorching sun with you all day. I knelt on the spot, my eyes red, looking at the rose bushes I had personally cultivated. Although these rare varieties were initially planted to surprise Brandon Rivers, every single flower here was my painstaking effort. Brandon Rivers personally destroyed all of this. He should pay the price for his actions, but the bodyguards were already impatient from waiting and swung their taser at me. Instantly, the skin on my back smelled like roasted meat. I gritted my teeth, trying not to utter a single sound of pain. But they didn't want to let me off so easily. They continued to electrocute me until my back was a mess of burned flesh, and I finally lost the strength to resist, under the direction of their tasers. I endured the high temperature and planted one vegetable seedling after another in the ground, but even the seedlings couldn't stand such high temperatures. One after another, they withered and fell to the ground. Seeing this, the bodyguards brought another basket of seedlings. Mr. Rivers said that if you can't get these seedlings to grow, you'll have to keep planting until they do. Before our engagement, Brandon Rivers never let me get tired. He was even afraid I'd fall while walking, caring for me like a porcelain doll. But I never expected that even before getting officially married, Brandon Rivers would treat me as less than human. I looked at the bare land, clenching my fists in anger, but in my heart, I was planning my escape under the bodyguards' oppression. I planted 999 vegetable seedlings in one day, but in such high temperatures, only 9 survived. I laughed sarcastically, allowing the bodyguards to drag me onto the scorching concrete ground beside me. When my skin touched the concrete, it burned and itched as if I were on fire. I tried to crawl towards the shady spots, but those bodyguards kicked me back, repeatedly. You stinking bitch, you even dared to threaten us with those few crappy flowers. We'll let you taste a life worse than death. After that, they even sang praises for Tiffany. Mrs. Rivers is so good. If she hadn't quietly reminded us to make you finish planting the vegetables by any means necessary, we wouldn't know how long you would have dragged us down. Only when my exposed skin was repeatedly scalded did I finally stop trying to crawl back. So I lay under the sun for a whole day, and my delicate skin turned dark. Just then, Brandon Rivers returned, carefully supporting Tiffany. He looked at me, completely darkened, with impatience in his eyes. Audrey Reed, I only asked you to garden for an hour. Is there a need to smudge your face like this to disgust people? I pursed my lips and sneered. I got this sunburn thanks to you and your Tiffany. Your Tiffany deliberately instigated the bodyguards to drag me out into the sun. Your Tiffany is truly kind, isn't she? Brandon Rivers frowned in displeasure. Audrey Reed, what nonsense are you spouting? That night, Brandon Rivers angrily locked me back in the storage room and confiscated my phone and keys. Brandon Rivers punished me by not letting me eat all day. It wasn't until a.m. the next day that Brandon Rivers opened the storage room and took out a bridesmaid dress for me to change into. He forcefully ordered, Audrey Reed, for the sake of our 5 years together, as long as you play the bridesmaid role well in this villa today, I will take responsibility for you after the baby is born, and you will still have a place in the Rivers family. If you can't even be a good bridesmaid today, my bodyguards will electrocute you until there's nothing left of you to escape this villa. I could only pretend to comply anyway. This villa was about to be sold, so I might as well play this game with them a little longer. I looked up at Brandon Rivers's cold eyes and suddenly grabbed his tie, asking him, Brandon Rivers, was your sexsomnia real? Brandon Rivers's expression froze, and he replied flustered, why are you asking that? Hurry up and put on your bridesmaid dress. I watched him flee from the storage room, then looked down at the phone I had smoothly taken from Brandon Rivers's arms. Unfortunately, it had a password, so I could only try multiple times. Remembering how Brandon Rivers protected Tiffany, I entered her birthday, but it showed an incorrect password. As a last resort, I tentatively entered my own birthday, and Brandon Rivers's phone unlocked. I never expected Brandon Rivers's phone password to still be the same, but his heart had long since rotted and soured. I immediately called Ethan Reed. Brandon Rivers, you're asking for trouble daring to call my phone. I cleared my throat and replied, it's me, Audrey Reed. My phone was confiscated by Brandon Rivers. Come to the Dolphin Cove Estates Villa now. I'll show you a good show. After hanging up the phone, I sent messages one by one to Brandon Rivers's business partners, inviting them to Brandon Rivers's wedding. After doing all that, I casually threw Brandon Rivers's phone into the pond. 3 hours later, in the master bedroom, Tiffany stood tall and arrogant in her wedding dress, her belly protruding, looking at me. Audrey Reed, your dark appearance truly makes you look like an unsophisticated clown. I curled my lips dismissively. That's still better than your child. Tiffany was about to hit me but saw Brandon Rivers walking over and gently leaned into his embrace. I followed their steps downstairs. It was a good thing the villa I bought was large enough, otherwise it couldn't have accommodated so many guests. Watching the guests quietly discussing my dark appearance, Tiffany curled her lips in satisfaction. Many guests who knew about my relationship with Brandon Rivers scoffed at my presence as a bridesmaid. As soon as the wedding banquet began, Tiffany raised her glass to toast me. Looking at her eager hand, I roughly guessed she had ill intentions. Just as I was about to refuse, Tiffany took the opportunity to grab my hand and pull me towards her. Tiffany then conveniently fell into Brandon Rivers's arms, and the wine spilled all over me. Tiffany started crying and complaining, Ms. Audrey, on our wedding day, how could you be so malicious as to wish my child dead? Although this child was accidentally conceived due to sexsomnia, he is still a Rivers family bloodline. How could you be so cruel? Before I could explain, Brandon Rivers slapped me hard across the face in front of all the guests. Audrey Reed, Tiffany kindly invited you to the wedding. Not only are you not grateful, but you're also repaying kindness with enmity. Just as Brandon Rivers was about to scold me further, Ethan Reed entered with the real estate agent and various investors from Brandon Rivers's company. He held up the villa's property deed and announced loudly, from today on, I am the owner of this villa. Audrey Reed has fully sold the house to me through the agent. Please all leave this villa immediately. He then turned, took my hand, and pulled out 2 marriage certificates from his embrace, telling the investors, Now I am the beloved husband of Audrey Reed, the socialite from a prominent family. I demand that you completely stop investing in Brandon Rivers's family company." Before the investors could react, Brandon Rivers looked at the marriage certificate in Ethan Reed's hand with a dark face and scoffed, "Sir, falsifying national documents is illegal. It's truly unkind of you to so brazenly impersonate Audrey Reed's husband. And if you're going to have a mental breakdown, do it somewhere else. This is my wedding with my wife, and it's not for an outsider like you to mess around." Then he smiled and addressed the investors and partners. "I, Brandon Rivers, apologize to you at the wedding banquet. I really didn't expect someone to so shamelessly impersonate a socialite from a prominent family. Audrey Reed, she's just from a well-off family. Besides having a little money, she followed me for 5 years and even washed clothes and cooked for me after our engagement. How could someone like her be a socialite from a prominent family?" Brandon Rivers' sophistry made the investors waver slightly. But they also knew Ethan Reed was the only son of the prestigious Fu family. A family of doctors. Given his status, he shouldn't be lying. However, Brandon Rivers sounded so certain, so they could only remain still, afraid of offending any major figure. After all, someone from above had previously paved the way for Brandon Rivers, asking them to support this Brandon Rivers who was nothing. But they didn't know these were all my previous instructions. After all, during that period, my relationship with my parents was strained, and I could only let my childhood friend help in a roundabout way. Ethan Reed, standing beside me, saw my gaze linger on Brandon Rivers and wrapped his arm around me. "Displeased Audrey, you told me yesterday not to get involved with other men and to marry into your family, so you shouldn't look at other men either." After speaking, Ethan Reed smiled triumphantly at Brandon Rivers, then mumbled, "Audrey, how could you have ever fallen for a man rotten to the core like him?" I shrugged helplessly. I was blind back then. To fall for such a cruel and ungrateful person. If he hadn't claimed sexomnia, had a child with Tiffany, and abandoned me, I wouldn't have seen his true colors so quickly. Brandon Rivers gritted his teeth, reminding me not to speak further. "Audrey Reed, there's a limit to your antics. Today is my wedding with Tiffany. If you keep causing trouble, I'll have the bodyguards throw all of you out of the villa." But I completely disregarded his threat and calmly said, "This villa now belongs to my husband, Ethan Reed. If you want to continue your wedding, you might need to find another venue." Tiffany tugged at Brandon Rivers' hand, complaining petulantly, "Brandon Rivers, Ms. Audrey is too malicious. We kindly invited her to the wedding. How can she be so demanding?" Brandon Rivers looked at my tanned skin, then at Ethan Reed beside me, and sneered, "Audrey Reed, if you hire someone to pretend to be your husband, why don't you find a good actor? Your acting is so poor. There's no genuine couple vibe at all. For old time's sake, if you continue to be Tiffany's bridesmaid, I'll forgive what you've done, otherwise. Don't blame me for being unkind." Seeing Brandon Rivers didn't believe my relationship with Ethan Reed, I stood on tiptoes and shared a deep, passionate kiss with Ethan Reed. For 3 minutes, the entire hall was silent. It was as if we were the protagonists of this wedding. I could only hear Brandon Rivers' clenched fists cracking. When the kiss ended, I generously introduced him to everyone. My husband, Ethan Reed, graduated from Stanford University with dual Ph.D. degrees in clinical medicine and psychology. He now serves as a chief physician at a top-tier hospital, but Brandon Rivers simply refused to believe. He coldly glanced at Ethan Reed. "Audrey Reed, don't talk big. How can a chief physician be so young?" Ethan Reed gently stroked my hair, smiling as he looked at Brandon Rivers. "In this era, ability determines everything. If you don't believe me, I can diagnose you right here. Didn't you claim to have sexomnia? Let me take a look." At that instant, Brandon Rivers visibly panicked. He was afraid that Ethan Reed was truly capable and would expose his lie. But under everyone's gaze, he couldn't just back down. "Go ahead and check. Who's afraid?" Ethan Reed openly took out a pocket watch and hypnotized him in front of everyone, asking, "Do you get up to use the restroom at night?" Brandon Rivers' expression immediately became blank, and he nodded. "Yes, and when you wake up in the morning, do you notice anything unusual about your body? Like swelling?" Brandon Rivers shook his head. "So was your sexomnia faked? How long have you faked it? Why did you use this to deceive Audrey?" Under the curious gaze of the guests, Brandon Rivers responded blankly, "It was faked. I faked it for 10 months because I like Audrey Reed, but Tiffany has been so lonely all these years. So I could only comfort her this way, and using the excuse of sexomnia, Audrey Reed wouldn't blame me. Our family of 4 should live the way I envisioned. The more Brandon Rivers spoke, the more agitated he became. It was as if I were merely a personal possession in his eyes. My eyes red-rimmed. I slapped Brandon Rivers. Brandon Rivers, I felt sorry for you for having that strange illness of sexomnia. Turns out it was all just a lie to deceive me. Brandon Rivers then came to his senses, realizing what he had just said. He suddenly pointed at Ethan Reed's nose and cursed him. "Did you play some dirty trick on me, making me lie publicly in front of everyone?" He then lowered his gaze to me. "Audrey Reed, I just got officially married to Tiffany and held a wedding. Is there a need for you to deliberately bring so many people here to make a fool of me? I know you greatly assisted my company back then, but 5 years have passed. I'm no longer a straw man to be manipulated. If you have nothing else to do, take your hired actors and leave." As soon as he finished speaking, Brandon Rivers's bodyguards immediately appeared before us, intending to escort us out of the wedding. Ethan Reed, seeing me being bullied, clapped his hands, and dozens of private jets descended upon the villa. Dozens of tall bodyguards swiftly dealt with Brandon Rivers's bodyguards. The guests all started discussing Ethan Reed's background, wondering how he could command such a grand display, even bringing private jets. Even I was stunned in place. It wasn't until Ethan Reed whispered an explanation into my ear that I nodded, my eyes red-rimmed. Ethan Reed snorted disdainfully and opened the property deed, warning Brandon Rivers, "If you continue to hold your wedding here, be careful. I'll call the police and report you for trespassing." Brandon Rivers glanced at the address and name on the property deed and snatched it away. Looking at Ethan Reed's name on the property deed, he suddenly grabbed my collar and asked me, "Audrey Reed, didn't you say this villa was for our wedding house? How could you give it to someone else?" My tone was cold. "You're just a relationship scammer. Even if I sell it cheaply to others, I won't let you benefit." Brandon Rivers then let go. He looked at my cold face, clutching his chest in pain, as if something was about to silently slip away. Tiffany saw Brandon Rivers's distressed expression, and a dark glint flashed in her eyes. She didn't want her long-awaited wedding to be ruined by me like this, she cried, grabbing Brandon Rivers's sleeve. "Brandon Rivers, since Ms. Audrey has found her own happiness, let's just wish them well." Then she pretended to be fragile and pleaded with Ethan Reed, "Mr. Ethan, we just want to have a wedding. Once it's over, we'll leave immediately." Brandon Rivers immediately objected to this. He no longer cared about Tiffany's pregnant state. His eyes filled with possessiveness for me. He suddenly grabbed my wrist and said coldly, "Audrey Reed, stop making a scene. I'll grant your wish. This wedding is off. But you can't be so demanding as to bring other men here to put on a show in front of me." Listening to Brandon Rivers's self-important words, I found it amusing. What made him think that Audrey Reed couldn't live without him? I shook off his hand and coldly rebuked, "Brandon Rivers, whether you have a wedding or not is none of my business. Ethan Reed brought the investors today to inform everyone that I am the one who has been secretly funding Brandon Rivers all along, the one you refer to as the socialite from a prominent family, Audrey Reed. Now that Brandon Rivers and I have broken up, I don't want to do this thankless job anymore. If you trust me, you should know what to do." Before Brandon Rivers's investors and partners could speak, Brandon Rivers brazenly announced, "I have never accepted anyone's funding in these past 5 years. I relied on my own strength to make my company establish itself in the city's elite circles. Besides, Audrey Reed and I have been together for several years, and I've never heard her mention anything about being a socialite from a prominent family. This is all just an excuse to mess up my wedding." Partners who had worked with Brandon Rivers multiple times easily believed his words, agreeing, "That's right. Brandon Rivers's ability is evident. Someone once offered $100 million for a real estate project, but Brandon Rivers settled it for $20 million and made us a fortune." Ethan Reed saw they didn't believe him and immediately called William and Elizabeth Reed on the spot. "William and Elizabeth Reed, someone is bullying your daughter, saying she's not a princess of the city's elite circles." The investors looked at William Reed's stern face. Anyone with a bit of status would know that what Audrey Reed and Ethan Reed said was true. They decisively stood behind me, announcing they would withdraw their investments from Brandon Rivers. Only those unsophisticated partners behind Brandon Rivers were still brazenly mocking William and Elizabeth Reed, pretending to be someone they're not. Seeing this, William Reed immediately became furious and instantly told Brandon Rivers in front of everyone, "You dared to bully my daughter like this? You just wait." Brandon Rivers was instantly startled. Brandon Rivers had met William and Elizabeth Reed before, but at that time, William and Elizabeth Reed had been dressed in casual clothes to test him, so they didn't look like wealthy magnates at all. Tiffany opened her mouth to mock me. Ms. Audrey, I know you want to make Brandon Rivers and I lose face, but you shouldn't spend so much money hiring actors. After all your future money will belong to Brandon Rivers. Listening to Tiffany's baseless words, I couldn't help but scoff. Brandon Rivers and I broke up ages ago, and Ethan Reed and I are married. Does he still want to marry for wealth and then exploit their assets? Brandon Rivers's face darkened. Before he could interject, his assistant rushed in, shouting, Mr. Rivers, this is bad. The company's stock has plummeted. You might be going bankrupt. At these words, the partners who had originally stood behind Brandon Rivers were stunned. They couldn't believe that a single word from William Reed could make Brandon Rivers go bankrupt, but now they had no choice but to believe it. Within moments, they all proposed to terminate their contracts with Brandon Rivers, apologized to me, and left the wedding, hoping to save themselves. However, from the moment they stood behind Brandon Rivers, they were like fish on a chopping block and could not escape. Brandon Rivers saw his partners fleeing and the remaining guests scattering in fear. He furiously demanded of me, Audrey Reed, you've ruined today's wedding. Are you satisfied now? If you're satisfied, send that pretty boy next to you away. You know I hate it when other men stand next to you the most. Ethan Reed was displeased by this. He pouted and spat at Brandon Rivers. Pfft, who do you think you are? Calling me a pretty boy? I'm just fairer skinned than you. You're just jealous that Audrey and I got officially married. I kissed Ethan Reed's cheek, comforting him. Good boy, we don't stoop to the level of a mad dog biting randomly. I glanced at Brandon Rivers, then at the ruined flowers in my outdoor conservatory, my voice devoid of emotion. Brandon Rivers, you used Ethan Reed's house for your wedding, which is trespassing. You also instigated the bodyguards to destroy my invaluable flowers. All these miscellaneous expenses add up to about $200 million. Do you want to pay in cash or by bank card? Brandon Rivers, who had just been told he was going bankrupt by his assistant, couldn't possibly come up with that much money. He immediately shifted the blame to the bodyguards in front of them. The flowers were picked by the bodyguards themselves. It has nothing to do with me, and you were going to give me this house anyway. How can you just open your mouth and demand money from me? Audrey Reed, you weren't so materialistic before. Brandon Rivers's bodyguards immediately became enraged. They furiously beat Brandon Rivers to vent their anger. They were about to leave but were stopped by my people, recalling the torment from yesterday. I couldn't help but sneer. Me, materialistic. How many resources have I funded you within these past 5 years, helping you establish yourself in the city's elite circles? Yet you only cared about your own happiness. You even fabricated the lie of sexsomnia to deceive me, hoping to enjoying the benefits of 2 relationships. How can all the good things in the world fall into your lap? Since you're so shameless, I won't be polite either. Ethan Reed, call the police and let them help us resolve these issues. Brandon Rivers immediately panicked upon hearing call the police. He suppressed his anger, forcing a smile as he pleaded with me. Audrey, for old time's sake, don't make a big deal out of this. Quickly tell Ethan Reed to retract the call the police report. Didn't you want to get officially married to me? I'll divorce Tiffany right now, and we can get officially married today. Tiffany's face instantly turned pale. She cried, clutching her belly, Brandon Rivers, didn't you promise to take care of me and our baby for life? Didn't you say you would only maintain a superficial relationship with Audrey Reed, and that I would be your only legal wife? The baby and I can't live without you. Please don't divorce me. I watched Brandon Rivers's gloomy expression and couldn't help but cover my mouth to stifle a laugh. Brandon Rivers, look, your wife Tiffany doesn't even support you. Why are you still putting on an act? Besides, I already have a beloved husband. Don't cause any more trouble anyway. Ethan Reed has already made the call the police, so you two just await legal consequences. Seeing that I couldn't be stopped, Brandon Rivers angrily turned to Tiffany. He slapped her, then furiously kicked her. He frustratingly ran his hands through his hair, cursing Tiffany loudly. It's all your fault. If you hadn't insisted on having this wedding in this villa with me, none of this would have happened. Tiffany cried out in pain, clutching her belly. But I was just doing it for our baby. And to save you money. How could you abandon me for that tramp Audrey Reed? My stomach hurts so much. Hurry and take me to the hospital. But the police arrived quickly, and Brandon Rivers had no time to tend to Tiffany. As soon as the police arrived, he immediately pushed all the responsibility onto the bodyguards. The bodyguards also regretted their actions and vehemently denied what they had done to me. However, once the police retrieved the surveillance footage, the bodyguards had no choice but to be taken to the police precinct for questioning and faced astronomical compensation. And Brandon Rivers, as the instigator, was naturally also ordered to pay compensation to avoid going to the police precinct. Brandon Rivers had no choice but to give me last of his savings. As for Tiffany, she was directly sent to the hospital. That day, Brandon Rivers left the villa like a defeated man. Later, I heard the news of Brandon Rivers' bankruptcy the day before Ethan Reed and I held our wedding. I was out shopping when I was unexpectedly blindfolded and abducted to an abandoned warehouse. I didn't know who had kidnapped me. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, hoping to call for help, but accidentally dialed Brandon Rivers' number. "I've been kidnapped. Come quickly and save me." On the phone, Brandon Rivers' desolate voice echoed. "Audrey Reed, you have a day where you need my help too. Do you know how miserable I've been since William and Elizabeth Reed made me bankrupt? I used to get tired of eating gourmet meals. Now I'm not only penniless but also heavily in debt, living in a small rental apartment, eating instant ramen every day, just surviving, waiting to die. I loved you so much. Why did you do this to me?" I sneered dismissively. "You loved me? Would you have lied about sexomnia? You just wanted to marry for wealth and then exploit their assets and also be with Tiffany. Don't try to make your filth sound so noble." Just as I was about to hang up the phone, someone suddenly pinched my chin and snorted coldly, "Audrey Reed, do you think Brandon Rivers will come save you? I'm the one he loves most, but my child was killed because of you." Hearing Tiffany's voice, a flicker of surprise crossed my eyes, then I couldn't help but scoff. "Your child was clearly killed by Brandon Rivers. You're seeking revenge on the wrong person. Or are you just jealous that my marriage is happy, my family is complete, and I have parents who love me more than life itself?" Tiffany violently ripped off my blindfold and slapped me. "Audrey Reed, what do you know? If it weren't for you, Brandon Rivers would never have abandoned me and the baby, and hidden away, refusing to see me." I smiled bitterly, helpless. "Brandon Rivers doesn't love me. He only loves himself. If you don't believe me, just wait and see if Brandon Rivers comes to save me." Tiffany told Brandon Rivers my location, speaking towards my phone. And while Tiffany wasn't paying attention, I quietly messaged Ethan Reed on my phone, asking him to come save me. After all, Brandon Rivers is such a selfish person. I didn't believe he would come save me. Half an hour later, Brandon Rivers arrived, dusty and disheveled. After only 2 months, Brandon Rivers had lost a lot of weight, his face terribly gaunt. He stood at the delivery room door, speaking coldly to Tiffany. "Tiffany, quickly release Audrey Reed. Do you really want me to hide in a small rental apartment like a rat, never seeing the light of day, for the rest of my life?" Tiffany froze at his words, but the blade instinctively pressed against my neck. Brandon Rivers walked towards me step by step, with genuine eyes. He knelt before me and apologized. "Audrey Reed, I wronged you before. Please forgive me this one time. I won't let Tiffany hurt you. Just listen to me, pay off my debts, and live honestly with me from now on. I won't let Tiffany hurt you." After saying this, he untied my ropes on his own. I stood frozen, saying nothing. Just as I was stunned, Tiffany suddenly shouted at me, her eyes red. "Audrey Reed, go to hell." The moment I was on the verge of death, Brandon Rivers shielded me with his body and apologized. "Audrey Reed, I'm sorry. I failed you. Consider this life my atonement to you." Meanwhile, Ethan Reed arrived with the police, instantly surrounding the scene and swiftly taking Tiffany away. Brandon Rivers, with his last breath, asked me, "Audrey, I took the blade for you. Can you forgive me just this once? Even if you're lying." I want to hear it, but my reply to Brandon Rivers was only a cold voice. "No, the harm you've inflicted on me is indelible. I will never forgive you in this lifetime." Brandon Rivers died on the spot at the abandoned warehouse, filled with remorse. And Tiffany was successfully arrested and sentenced to death. Later, Ethan Reed and I held our wedding. On our wedding night, Ethan Reed asked me, "Why did you choose to get officially married with me back then?" I smiled faintly, "Perhaps because I lost a bet to you."